Welcome to Unmasking the Dark Side. I'm Sierra, your guide into the darkest corners of true crime, cults, conspiracy theories, and more. So let's dim the lights and see what lurks in the shadows. Pyramid Lake, one of the most popular places where families all over Nevada and even some parts of California come to escape the brutal desert heat. Every summer, thousands flock to Pyramid Lake, or simply just Pyramid, as the locals call it, to swim, fish, tan, and enjoy the cold and refreshing water of one of the Silver State's most beautiful natural treasures. Beneath the surface of the deep water swim many species of fish, from largemouth and smallmouth bass to the famous Lahontan cutthroat trout. But hidden beneath this beautiful blanket of water are stories far more unsettling. One of them specifically is a tale known by many Nevadans. Just two small and simple words. Two words that carry with them a tragic history and an even darker legend. And if you're a local like myself, you probably already know what I'm talking about. This is the legend of water babies. Before we continue, I would like to make something clear. The stories we are about to discuss are deeply rooted in the traditions and history of the Northern Paiute people and are treated with respect by many to this day. I am not here to mock, exaggerate, or overshadow the stories themselves or the history behind them. Nevada has a very rich history, and my goal is simply to share one of Nevada's most well-known legends with the respect it deserves. So, with that being said, let's get back to our story. Growing up in Nevada, I've heard the stories of water babies countless times. It's one of those legends that seems to have a way of following you around. And I've also seen just how seriously some people take these stories, which is understandable considering just how dark the legend truly is, as well as the fact that parts of the stories are rooted in a very real tragedy in history. While some may consider this story to be nothing more than a scary story told around the campfire while roasting marshmallows, these stories have been passed around for potentially hundreds of years, and as such, different versions of the story exist. However, many agree on one thing. The cries of the water babies are something you never want to hear. Now, before we get to the story itself, I'd like to talk more about the Northern Paiutes. I think it's important to realize that while they are largely associated with this dark legend, these individuals do exist. They are real people. And just like you and me, they have a way of life and morals, and they do deserve to be addressed with respect. The Northern Paiute people have lived in the Great Basin for thousands of years. And while it is impossible to pinpoint an exact date or era of time, historians and archaeologists generally agree that this specific group of Native Americans have inhabited what is now Nevada, Eastern California, Southeastern Oregon, and Southern Idaho for at least several thousand years. Some evidence even dates back 10,000 years, or possibly even more. The Northern Paiute call themselves Numu or Numa, meaning the people. They are not one single tribe, but rather several different tribes set all throughout the Great Basin. So they didn't have one single chief. Each group was led by a different chief, with these being the most recognizable. Chief Winnemucca, Poito, was the leader of the tribe settled on the shores of Pyramid Lake, and he played a critical political role during the Paiute War of 1860. Him, as well as his daughter, Sarah Winnemucca, are both very well known, with Sarah being the first Indigenous woman to publish an autobiography. She's also known for establishing a private school for Native American children somewhere in Lovelock, Nevada. Chief Truckee, aka Old Winnemucca, was a well-respected man and he was known for being a very powerful medicine man, but also a guide and peacemaker. He was a really big help in interacting with European Americans moving into California. Chief Numaga was a leader of peace, and despite facing severe threats made by white forces intent on invading Native American land, this man was able to negotiate and de-escalate against fighting during the Pyramid War of 1860, which I will actually get into later. The legacy he left behind is honored during the Numaga Indian Days powwow hosted in Hungry Valley. Chief Paulina was the leader of his tribe who was settled in Oregon called Hunipuwatuka. He is known for his clever defensive tactics during the conflict of the 1860s. Wovoka, widely known as Jack Wilson, was considered to be an extremely influential prophet and spiritual leader, and he is credited for creating the ghost dance religion, which was widely accepted in the late 19th century. The Northern Paiute were extremely adaptable. They were hunters/gatherers. They primarily lived off of pine nuts, fish, and whatever small game happened to be around them. Communal group hunts were put together to travel between valleys, migrating around rivers and lakes to gather supplies, some of which were only available during certain seasons. They utilized pronghorn and rabbits for food and to create clothing. They were also masters of weaving baskets using the local flora. They also used a tool called a tule reed to ensure that their shelters and their watercraft were stable and reliable. They also dug expansive ditches used for irrigation using runoff from the Sierra Nevada mountains. This method allowed them to use melted snow and runoff from the mountains to water their crops, and also allowed them to create tunnels, which allowed them to catch fish. This led to them being called Kui Tikata, or Kui eaters. Kui was the name of the fish that they caught and ate. The primary foundation for the belief system used by Numa is called Puha. This is a force that gives life to everything in the physical universe, including the wind, plants, animals, water, even the sun, moon, and stars. They believed in animism and personhood, where everything possesses a soul, and therefore life. Geological features like rivers, formations of rocks, and even weather patterns are addressed and treated like living, breathing energies, and humans can communicate with them. This also includes water babies. While humans are definitely a part of this religion, they are not inferior or superior to anything else, but rather an equal part of this system. And in order to keep things fair and equal, they abide by a law that dictates that when resources are to be taken from the earth, individuals must give something back, and they also must have strict permission. They most notably gave back things like sacred tobacco, beads, shells, or sage. And also, when an animal was to be killed, every single part of that animal had to be used. If a hunter was greedy by taking more than what was needed, or he left meat or other materials to decay and rot, this was seen as an extreme offense. This act would be seen as disrespectful and disregard to the animal and the sacrifice of its life. The meat, hide, hooves, and sinew were all to be treated with purpose to show that the animal's death had meaning. The death of an animal was seen as a gift that should be fully valued. If not, the spirits would punish wasteful behavior or lack of regard with things like illness or severe misfortune. Interestingly enough, the process was not done when the animal was used. Unusable pieces, such as internal fluids or bones deemed too small to use, were to be returned to the earth or the water. And this was typically done with prayers, which would ensure that the life of the animal could return to the spirit realm and be regenerated and reborn. Among these beliefs are stories that have been passed down generation by generation, and one in particular still lingers today along the shores of Pyramid Lake. in the deepest and darkest parts of the cold water. A story known simply as Water Babies. As I mentioned earlier, this legend has been around for a really long time. So there are different versions of the story depending on who you ask. In some versions of the story, the water babies are not seen, but they are heard and felt by its victims. In some versions of the story, the water babies are very small, no bigger than an infant child. They have sharp fangs, long hair, and they have human-like eyes that are very dark. And they also have reptilian skin and tails. Some other stories allege that they actually present themselves as beautiful women, and similar to sirens in Greek mythology, they lure people in by their beauty. But regardless, all these stories land on the conclusion that the cries of the water babies can be heard if one sits very still and very quiet. They also agree that some odd things occurring at Pyramid Lake are due to the water babies, things like sudden drop-offs and bursts of bad and unpredictable weather. And as interested as I am in this story, we could probably sit here for hours discussing all the different stories. So today I'm going to cover 3 of these stories. This story alleges that an indigenous woman was abducted by white settlers who were traveling through the Great Basin. The woman was raped and impregnated by the settlers. The woman was so deeply upset and traumatized by the brutality that when she gave birth, she drowned her babies in Pyramid Lake. The story goes on to claim that this was the start of the Paiute War. Now, I did tons of research, but I was unable to find anything backing up this story. However, I did come across a real-life story that did actually take place, so let's get into that. In 1860, there were 3 brothers, James, Oscar, and David Williams. They owned a saloon that also acted as a stagecoach shop and a store called Williams Station. James was the oldest brother, and he was the primary owner and operator of Williams Station. In early May, with some saying around May 6th, Oscar and David kidnapped 2 young Paiute girls and brutally assaulted them inside Williams Station. A local Paiute man discovered the girls, and he gathered 8 other men. They went back to Williams Station, where the 2 brothers and 3 other men were in the main room. The group rescued the girls and trapped the men inside the building. After that, they burned the building down to the ground. According to station logs, the 3 other men were 25-year-old Samuel Sullivan, a married man who was living in Nevada after moving from New York; John Fleming, a single man who was also 25 and from New York; and the 3rd man, well, you don't really know hardly anything about him. His real name, age, and place of residence were never officially recorded in local records. All we know is that he went by Dutch Phil and that he may have been from Germany. And the only reason we really know this is because at the time, Dutch was slang for a German immigrant. But regardless of who the 3rd man was, all 3 men died, either from smoke inhalation or they burned to death. James was away on a camping trip, and so obviously he was not harmed during this time. As far as the 2 young girls, we don't really know much about them either. However, witnesses do say that the girls appeared to be no older than 12, and they were either the daughters or the nieces of Chief Numaga or Chief Winnemucca. The reason for not knowing who these people were due to really poor documentation of this time, as documentation from this time heavily relied on military logs, stories from the newspaper, and of course, word of mouth. When James returned the next day and discovered his shop had been destroyed, he became so angry, he went up to Virginia City and warned the people there of a quote-unquote Native American uprising. This event also enraged other white men living in the area. So much so that on May 12th, 105 men attempted to attack the Paiutes. But this attack ended up being unsuccessful as the Paiutes killed 76 of the men. This event did actually spark the Paiute War. The war lasted approximately 2 months and was ended in a ceasefire in August. Chief Numaga was able to negotiate with federal authorities, and they both agreed to stop fighting on 2 terms. 1 being that the Paiutes would stop attacking buildings, and 2, that the U.S. military would stop all active attacks against the tribes. Survival in the Great Basin was not easy. It required a lot of physical strength and endurance. It is believed during this time that the Paiutes practiced eugenics. This led to the belief that when a baby was born, either prematurely, physically deformed, or sickly, they were placed into baskets made of willow. The baskets were then placed into the water and guided into the strong and dangerous currents of Pyramid Lake. Some even believe that the baskets were weighed down with stones, and unfortunately, the babies would then drown. The spirits of these babies then turned into malicious and vengeful spirits intent on luring victims to their watery graves. This is done by mimicking the cries of babies out on the water, and the unsuspecting victims follow the cries, thinking that a baby is in need of help. And by the time they realize that it's not what it seems, it's too late. The spirits grab hold of them and pull them underneath the cold and dark water, never to be seen again. Despite extensive research, I was unable to find anything that truly backs this story up, and ancestors of the tribe adamantly deny the story. However, I did find out some information that shows just how seriously the tribe takes childbirth, so let's talk about that. Paiute people are well known for being the most skilled basket weavers in the world. They made very durable hand-woven baskets made of all kinds of plants that are found in the desert. These plants were strong and durable, but they were also flexible enough to be woven into patterns. The baskets were mostly made out of things like willow, tule, sagebrush, sumac, and yucca plants. They even made baskets for carrying water that were completely waterproof. They did this by tightly weaving the materials together and coating both sides of the basket with pine tree resin and red clay. Now, about childbirth. These people regarded childbirth as a deeply spiritual occasion and was therefore extremely sacred. The mother and father were actually put through a series of rituals that took place over a period of 30 days to prepare them for parenthood. The pregnant women were kept separated from the rest of the tribe, and elder women would sit with them and offer them ancestral wisdom and advice, and also offer emotional support. The mothers-to-be would also have to follow a very strict diet that involved avoiding cold water and any animal-based foods. The fathers were told to run every day, east at sunrise and west at sunset, and this would teach him discipline, and it would also attach the father's energy to the birth of his child, ensuring a safe delivery. If a pregnancy or delivery were compromised, a shaman, or medicine man, would offer prayers to the spirits of nature and would conduct sacred rites. The birth of the baby was seen as a ceremony in conjunction with the environment around them, so frequent prayers were offered to the sun during sunrise, blessing the new life. When a baby was born, care systems were actually used, which would connect the baby to its lineage and, of course, to the earth. They also made very specific cradle boards, or khan, which would keep the baby swaddled, but also allow the parent to keep the baby close to them while they performed their daily duties. This next story isn't about water babies per se, but I'm including it here because over time, as these stories were passed down, these two stories were kind of mixed together and confused, and they were told as one story. So let's get into it. On the eastern shore of the lake is a very interesting tufa rock formation, and it very closely resembles a woman with a basket at her side. This is the Stone Mother. According to folklore, the Stone Mother was the mother of all people, and she had 4 children in particular who are the focus of this story. These 4 children, according to the story, these 4 children began to become very argumentative and began to misbehave extremely badly, to the point where the mother ended up separating them, sending 2 of them to the north and 2 to the south. But before she sent them off, she asked each child to light a fire at sunset to let their mother know that they were safe. The children that were sent to the north dutifully lit their fires for the first 3 nights. However, the children that were sent to the south did not, and this devastated the woman. She cried profusely for 4 days straight, and she cried so much that her tears filled the basin and created what is now Pyramid Lake. The weight from her grief and her heavy heart chained her to that spot, and she ended up staying at that same spot for so long that she turned into stone right alongside her basket. The Stone Mother was created sometime 13 to 26,000 years ago during the later years of the Pleistocene epoch. This was when Lahontan Lake was massive and Pyramid Lake was part of it. She was created when underwater springs deposited calcium into the water, and eventually Lahontan evaporated and became much smaller to the size it is now. And the calcium was then exposed to the hot and dry desert air of Nevada. Thus, the Stone Mother was created. These stories often get mixed up because there are similar themes in the stories, like motherhood, crying, and the loss of children. And some people also confuse the children sent away in the Stone Mother story for the water babies themselves. Both stories are set at Pyramid Lake, and they are set around the same group of people, and they have been passed down by word of mouth for generations, allowing details to change over time. But ultimately, the Stone Mother and the water babies are 2 separate stories. Whether the cries of the water babies can be chalked up as to nothing more than water echoing across the water in a weird way, or something far more mysterious, is for us to decide. What cannot be questioned, however, is the history of the Northern Paiute tribe and their intense and deep connection to the land, as well as the traditions carried down by the generations. Regardless of what you believe, the stories and the people do deserve to be approached with respect, as they are a huge part of the culture and heritage of the people who have called Pyramid Lake home for thousands of years. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere between history and legend. Or perhaps some mysteries were never meant to be fully understood. The story may end here, but the questions do not. So, stay curious, stay cautious, and I'll see you in the shadows.